This episode is brought to you by WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. At WeatherGuard, we support design engineers and make lightning protection easy. You're listening to the Struck Podcast. I'm Dan Blewett.
I'm Alan Hall.
And here on Struck, we talk about everything aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. All right, welcome back to the Struck Aerospace Engineering Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett. On today's show, we're going to talk about Jeff Bezos completing his maiden voyage with Blue Origin today. We'll talk about Tesla and some predictions from Morgan Stanley that they might enter the eVTOL market at some point. The latest in the Wisk Archer fights. And lastly, an iFly concept, which is basically a single passenger eVTOL, and whether this idea of having a residential, own your own eVTOL aircraft might be something that could come to fruition in the future. So Alan Hall's here. Alan, how are you, sir?
Hey, great, Dan. A lot of crazy space news lately with Bezos going into space and all the Twitter hate that came after that. So that's an interesting morning to watch the launch and know that it's just going to be a wrath of anti-Bezos, anti-Amazon hate on Twitter. You just knew it was coming.
Well, I saw a good, we all grew up with The Onion, which is that great satirical news network, which is still kicking, but there's a new one called the Babylon Bee, and there was a headline today. It said, space rejects Amazon package, and it showed the capsule landing back on our origin, or back on Earth. So that was good and it's clever.
Yeah.
But what were your thoughts about the voyage? Obviously, it went off without a hitch. Good for
Right.
Bezos for being on the maiden voyage, proving it out, just like the manufacturer of the
Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, and I was gonna say the bulletproof vest back in the day. The inventor of that. That video is crazy. He just puts it right to his chest and shoots it, then gets up and fires off at a couple of targets. If you want people to believe in it, you've got to be the first sometimes, be the pioneer, take the risk. But was there really that much risk in this?
No. Well, I think the odds makers said there was about 10% risk based on the number of flights that they had done and just watching from the outside. That's a number that was bandied about. I saw a couple of times in some engineering discussions, but it was probably less than that. Anytime you hook yourself to a hydrogen-filled, oxygen-filled tube, there's a chance for something to go wrong. And there's just inherent risk with all of it. Even on the return back, the parachutes don't deploy, all those things have to work flawlessly for there to be a successful flight. So, but I don't think there's going to put Bezos at too much risk. It does seem to coincide that he sort of resigned from the company, so to speak, from day-to-day activities before he went off and got in this rocket, because that would have been really cataclysmic for Amazon stock if he had been at the head, and there would have been some sort of cataclysmic event that happened during that flight. But it does seem like they have done their homework. You know what I'm saying? If you watch, I don't know if you had a chance to watch all of the broadcast, but
I watched a portion of it. I saw the launch and the aftermath. I didn't listen to all the preamble, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of preamble today. But I had watched some of the earlier launches and the videos that go along with that, describing the different phases of flight and how the systems work. So it's not super complicated, and it's not getting in orbit, obviously, like SpaceX has done quite a bit lately. So it's a much simpler, less complicated rocket structure. But I do think they're going to keep going forward. I think that's the most important part, is there's going to be now Boeing has some competition with Elon Musk and SpaceX, which is really trying to capture the launch market, and then Blue Origins is somewhere in third place right now, it seems like, or fourth place, just trying to keep ahead and be relevant at this point. And I think that's why you put Bezos in it, is just so that all the buyers of that, or launchers of spacecraft, see this successful flight. And as the rocket develops further, they're going to try to market it and sell space on it, and time on it, and get up to orbit. That's where they're going. So the marketing here is super important. It's just like anything that comes to market a little bit late, it's hard to catch up, and they're going to have to spend a lot of time catching up because SpaceX has done so well.
Well, I mean, where do you see? So obviously, aerospace things always trickle down into mainstream consumerism. I mean, what's going to trickle down from all these different flights, whether it's Blue Origin, whether it's SpaceX, any of them? I mean, what are we going to get from this as a species? Because I know, like you said, it has taken a lot of flack where people are like, it's burning too much CEO. You should be helping us on Earth with all of our social problems, which that's a complicated argument, but. And what trickles down technology-wise from some of these launches?
Well, I think the biggest one lately has been the return of the rocket portion to land itself and be reusable, which 5 years ago was really unheard of, and now it's an everyday event. I think that's been the biggest technology improvement is how the rocket engines work, starting and stopping them, which is always problematic, and the getting the modeling right of computationally how to land this rocket. So there's as you watch SpaceX particularly learn how to recover those rockets, a lot of the early events were not good, and so you start off with this engineering model of how it's supposed to work, and then you realize the rocket doesn't work that way. And I was watching a video yesterday, which is sort of relevant to this, in that one of the earliest launches on SpaceX, Falcon 9, was when it separated the first section came off and the second section kind of went on into space. There's a little pause. First main engine shut off. Okay, and then there's a little separation that happens, and then the second stage kicks on and goes on into space. Well, when that happened, the first stage didn't really shut off. It had a little bit of thrust left on it as you shut down a rocket motor, and it whacked into the bottom of the second stage. And I guarantee you, someone back on Earth's like, "Holy cow, that was not supposed to happen. What's going on?" And that's where you learn the hard lessons of how the rocket motors and all the systems actually perform versus what you have modeled them to perform. So there's a lot of systems learning that goes on there and performance. That just improves the reliability, the sustainability, and just increases the safety record of all these rocket launches over time. And so what it will do from like people like us, Dan, if Musk is going to put up basically internet in the sky, and Bezos is sort of talking about the same thing. The Europeans are talking about a similar system of internet in the sky. To keep the cost down, you have to have reusable rockets. You have to have reliable systems that launch it. And so it lowers the cost for people like you and me of internet access. That's what it'll do. Versus just one and done rockets, you're going to be able to lower the cost of launches, which has been which is by itself a remarkable feat. Because when my wife and I worked in the space industry and did spacecraft launches, the rocket's a lot of money, and it's a one and done event. And if it doesn't work and you lose a spacecraft, then you're starting out. It just multiplies the cost of a communication satellite. Yeah. Now everything's much more reliable, right? And so even though we may not see like a Velcro or a WD-40, which is the things you hear about from NASA, mm-hmm. Like, hey, what did NASA produce? Well, there's Velcro. Tang, yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Do kids even have that anymore? I'm not even sure that's a thing anymore.
I still think Tang is good. I like Tang. I've always liked Tang.
Oh, yeah? Do they sell it? I haven't seen it forever. Okay.
It's next to like the Gatorade powder and next to the Country Time lemonade powder. But I don't think people really. I think it's seen its heyday a long time ago. It's not real popular, I don't think, anymore. But anyway.
But don't you see that as like those fallouts of the 1960s and early 70s investment in space that we made is it's Velcro. But there's a lot more to it than that, and I think you just don't, because it's so complicated. You may not realize all the material advancement and all the technical things that got better. The computers got better. I mean, there's just a driving factor from every aspect to make rockets safer. So we needed the 1960s and 70s to get to the 2021s, and it's an evolution.
But hearing some of these scientists talk, kind of rebut Musk's ideologic vision of Mars, they're like, this is like the terribly inhospitable planet. It's like so hot, so cold. Like the atmosphere is very toxic. I mean, just like everything about it is not a place that humans really want to be. So it's unclear like what the end game is from that, like making our species interplanetary or multiplanetary, whatever the term is.
That's
Where
true.
do you fall on that?
I understand the vision, but I also understand the difficulties with it, and I think that's why Musk doesn't have a lot of followers yet on the Mars vision. There are some, but there's not as many as I thought there would be at this point, because the success of SpaceX would there thereby normally say, well, if Musk can do X with all the launches, he can do Y, which is put people on Mars. But that's just a huge technological leap, and I think, just in the lowering the cost of rocket launches, it's going to make a big difference in things like monitoring the Earth, which is what a lot of spacecraft do today. There's a lot of Earth monitoring satellites that check cloud cover, check for gases in the atmosphere, check for the temperature of the Earth, check for all kinds the ice flows, right? So there's a lot of different pieces that are flying around that you and I don't have a lot of investment in or know a lot about, because they don't really affect us on a day-to-day like the internet would. But there's a lot of science in the sky right now, and if we can lower the cost of that, that means we can, for one, monitor the Earth a lot better than we have in the last previous 40 years. And I think that's a huge benefit by itself. So to me personally, I don't really care if we get to Mars. I think more importantly, it allows us to learn more about Earth. It allows us to do things less expensively, which then, in the case of internet, may bring internet to the world where places where they just don't have it right now. And I think can be very, very beneficial.
Yeah, and that is a good point, because here in America, especially in a city, you just don't think about other countries and how unconnected some of them are.
Right.
Like like Africa, India, places that there are lots of people without internet who could suddenly have access to remote jobs, and a lot of these, like
School.
the way yeah, and, obviously
Yeah.
education, yeah, just the way the world's changing. I mean, with like some of these companies like Fiverr, where you can get graphic design done real cheap here in U.S., where it's
Right.
actually paying a pretty decent wage to someone in another country who's willing to design something that's pretty good for 10, 15 bucks. And you're like, hey, this is amazing, cheap labor. And they're like, this is a good wage for me over here, and I'm working from home. And so,
Right.
whether or not that economy is good, I don't know, because I've had questions about like why does this cost so little? Like, why aren't they getting paid more? Like, you never know. Anyway, but
Don't
yeah,
know.
it's going to
Well,
open up a lot of opportunities to a lot of people.
and we do know that as the economic conditions increase for areas where there's just poverty now, if we can get them to some median, moderate level of income, it changes the way they deal with the environment. So if we're
Hmm.
actually looking to reduce things like the burning of coal, or the burning of dung, or the burning of wood, or all the other things that get burned for fuel, one, having internet connections and so that maybe they can do a job would be fantastic. Increase their income, they'll change their energy sources, which will reduce CO2 emissions, and a lot of things like that will change. So the consequences, the follow-on effect of having internet, or in that Slingshot program with Dean Kamen about getting clean water to places, how it just radically changes the lifestyle of everybody around that one piece of technology. We don't know how far it's going to go, but it feels like it's going to be a much more positive thing. And obviously Bezos is going to want to have some play in that just as much as Musk does. So this is where we haven't seen that sort of clash of the titans in industry like we maybe have seen in the late 1800s, like with the railroads and oil and the Carnegies and right, and Ford, right? Having these massive colossal companies hasn't happened in a long time. For whatever reason, we feel like we're kind of, that is starting to crank up again in terms of just billionaires with a lot of cash investing in large scale projects around the country, in the US mostly, but also around the world. And with the follow on consequences that you just don't know, But that's why I think this Twitter thing's happening. People are very uncomfortable about where this is going, and letting a couple of billionaires, as it's described on Twitter, letting a couple of billionaires decide the future of the economy, the future of the country, da 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 da. It's the same thing, the argument we had 150 years ago. And we're going to relive it in a more technological way, which is fascinating. It's fascinating. It's going to be a lot of changes.
All right, moving on to our EVTOL segment today. So speaking of Elon Musk and Tesla, Adam Jonas, a Morgan Stanley analyst who covers Tesla quite a bit, he believes that Tesla's going to get into the electric vertical takeoff and landing space at some point. Now on it was the Joe Rogan podcast, wasn't it? A couple months ago.
I think so. I was going to ask you the same thing.
I think it was. And he was asked about aircraft. Yeah, it was Joe Rogan. And he was asked about going into aviation. He said, this is just such a hard problem to solve with electric aircraft. But I think he was talking about commercial airliners, like making a 737 electric, and you've talked about the difficulties of that here. But I don't think that question was posed as far as like from an EVTOL standpoint, because it seems to me like this would be something that Tesla's engineering and obviously their battery tech and financial resources could certainly handle. I mean, Alan, do you think they're going to throw their hat into the ring here?
I watched that Musk question from Rogan, and it was like in the third hour, like the last 10 minutes of
it was
of that interview. It was way at the end, and that's interesting that you thought it was about 737s, because I thought it was about eVTOLs. So maybe you're on the Rogan side of that, and I was on the Musk side of that, because that's what we're dealing with today.
Well, I felt like the whole conversation was framed about like commercial transportation. Of course, like eVTOL market, they hope to be, but they were talking about. I think they were talking about tractor trailers. They definitely mentioned trains, just the other things that he could electrify essentially. Right. So at least in my mind, I was like, I thought they were talking about commercial, but we'll have to go back to the clip. But sorry, continue on.
Well, I do think that's interesting, because I think his response was way beyond what Rogan was able to comprehend. When I was listening to it, the thing that registered with me is that Musk clearly understands the engineering challenges that are in front of any aircraft developer, which means that he has had those conversations with engineers asking about that marketplace, that he's been at least dipped his toe into it, or been listening to a series of discussions talking about the pluses and minuses of trying to be in that business. So maybe he's sitting on some of the boards, or maybe he knows people are on some of the boards that are on these eVTOL companies, just trying to get a flavor for what's happening. But he had very specific issues with developing an aircraft, and every one of them was right. So that just said to me, knowledge. He has been playing around a little bit, feeling out that market. But don't you think that the area where Musk can enter it immediately is in the battery market? Like it's all about batteries, and they seem to be waiting for Musk to develop some magic battery, and just the bouncing around of things you hear engineering wise. You got this sort of gold standard, which has never been really developed, is a solid state battery. And there's a feeling like maybe Toyota has developed a solid-state battery. Maybe that's what Joby's living on, is that maybe Toyota can develop a solid-state battery. At the same time, that if there is this utopia of batteries and it is solid-state, that Musk is looking at it too. So maybe it's more about the play of, I'm going to sell a bunch of batteries into that aircraft market, which, from Musk's concern is easy. I don't have to get involved in making an airplane, just sell batteries. Don't you think that's a much quicker way to be in the marketplace and be like a big contributor to it?
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to this, but is Tesla's battery technology that far in a way advanced over a company like Panasonic, which is one of the global leaders? Like, is Tesla really a battery company, or are they more of a car company? Or they like I don't know where their like highest level proprietary thing falls. Do you?
I would say
are the batteries really that special?
Well, yeah, I think the answer is yes, in the sense that they can mass produce them. And that's what makes it special. And they are a high quality battery, as we have seen lately. The battery has improved significantly since they first started. And just the massive scale of the infrastructure that they built to make batteries allows them to drive down costs and to also push technology into the battery so you can make those 2%, 3% improvements in multiple areas to keep going up the technology chain and lowering the cost, increasing the density, energy density, all those things. I think Musk has, in a sense, sort of captured that. But again, it's a question of sort of the lithium technology versus this unyet proven solid state battery. You know, where does all that fit in terms of how much you're going to invest in either one of them? Which one's going to come out with a winner in the end? Who knows, right? But don't you think that from Musk's standpoint, they've got so much risk on the space side and also on the car side in terms of liability that do you want to put more liability on your company or create another company? From a business standpoint, I don't know.
It does seem like on the one hand they could just sort of, hey, take your batteries and like jump in the ring, but on the other hand, like you said, yeah, it would take a lot more regulatory stuff. There'd be a lot more hurdles that way. You know, like you said, if there's a crash or any of that's going to really set you back, that's going to happen to any of these companies.
Yeah,
they're going to have to play catch up to other, even though they have brand awareness and a pretty strong brand moat, they're going to have to play catch up to Joby and some of the other ones, right? So
they would.
Yeah.
They totally would. Yeah. And I'll give you another piece of information that happened this week also, which is I saw an announcement from the FAA that they're going to put an office, like a space launch office down in Texas. I thought, wow, that's interesting. Okay, why is the FAA doing that? Well, Bezos's launches are out of Texas, and all the Musk's launch are out of Texas. So now I got this regulatory entity going to be closer by to help regulate, I guess, what happens on the launch side. And I thought, well, you know, that's probably as much regulatory oversight at any of the companies that Musk has ever seen as the FAA on the space launch. But if he starts going further and pushes into the aircraft side, he's really going to get a lot of oversight. And I'm not sure he's super comfortable with that because I don't know on the car side, Dan, how much oversight has there been on the regulatory side? Right? There's not a huge amount.
Yeah, I don't know.
Car's a car sort of thing, right? It's going to be again. I look at it as someone's running a company. Do I want to take on the risk, and how much money do I need to pour into it to get my investment out of it? And
well, I feel like they could also. Yeah. Well, I also feel like they could wait and be like, let's let a bunch of these guys fight it out for a while. Let's let this simmer for another 5 years. And then because they do have such a strong brand, they could just be like, let's let, these guys duke it out, figure out the airports, the infrastructure, all that stuff, prove out the business model. Then we'll just jump in the ring later with our big brand and sell a premium EVTOL, just like Apple could enter any market at any time. And people are going to be like, wow, I want an Apple toaster. I want an Apple, bus. I want an Apple, whatever, anything they could make. People be like, they just have such trust in their brand. And I feel like Tesla has a similar brand, even though they have, one offering right now, cars, but they probably don't have to take on that risk early. They could probably wait.
Do you think the autonomous feature of the car is their biggest selling point today? Like it's self-driving.
I don't know. I mean,
and on some level, self-driving. Do you think that's the biggest, that's a Tesla, it sort of self-drives? Is that their number one feature, or is it the electric?
I don't think so. I think it's just the sleek, the quiet car. It's just futuristic. It's just got the veneer. I mean, if you have a Tesla, it's like you're kind of a somebody, right? It says something about you, I think.
Okay.
It's like that confluence of environmentally friendly, it's sleek, it's new, you're the forward thinker, you care about the planet, plus it's expensive and people know that. So I feel like it's really just a good luxury product in general. I don't know that people buy it really so much for the self-driving, and that's still a really complicated long way away. from what
Yeah,
I've read about
I
AI,
think
that
so.
it's still so hard to solve for that.
It is, but the latest, I would say, over the last 3 months or so, maybe a little bit longer, the Musk tweets about Tesla seem to revolve around software updates and autonomous driving. And the feedback that gets from Twitter users about fully autonomous, using the cameras, not using LiDAR to do the driving, right? And
Hmm.
in the eVTOL market, there is definitely going to be a push for autonomous flight, no pilots. The problem is that the FAA has no regulatory basis to deal with it yet. And if Musk can walk in with an autonomous driving car, they may have the software and the technical ability to make an autonomous aircraft and handle the regulatory aspect because their technology is so far in front of something that an aircraft company would develop. I mean, they're obviously 10 years ahead of everybody else. That may be their entry into market with the batteries, which then could make eventually into an airplane. But there's a lot of regulatory hurdles to jump over right now.
Yeah. So, but it's a fun thread to follow. So we'll see what, whether, Apple might enter the car market at some point and duke it out with Tesla, as you talked about, sort of like not billionaires, but just, these high powered titans of industry clashing. And then also,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see what Tesla does going forward, because they could enter any market they want conceivably and do quite
Yes.
well at it. Moving on here, there's just a new peep out of Archer. They filed an additional brief opposing Wisk's motion for preliminary injunction. And they've said that Wisk has not provided any relevant evidence to support their claims that Archer has stolen, proprietary information from them. So, Alan, does this strike you as anything new, or they're just continuing just to push? And where do you think this is going at this stage?
When I read the latest info coming out of Archer, I think you have to read it with a legal framework in mind and how a lawyer or lawyer/PR person would write a press release such that it doesn't come back to haunt them. And that means, where's the dog that's not barking? Where is this thing that's hanging out there that is the point of dispute, which no one's talking about, that Archer's not going to talk about? And it seems to be in the engineers. That is where the pinch point is. The Archer press release said something like, to the effect of, Wisk has not been able to show that Archer has any of Wisk's material. Archer company. Well, Archer as a company is with engineers or without engineers, right? Is it these engineers that supposedly downloaded data when they walked out of the Wisk door? Is Archer framing this such a way that they exclude the employees? What does that exactly mean? Because the FBI seems to be involved. That seems to have happened. Now, where that leads, who knows? The FBI right now, I think you could make a lot of cases that they're not very effective at anything. So, is any real consequences going to happen if data was taken? Is the FBI going to press charges against the engineers who theoretically took some material? Kind of doubt it. Not unless there's a foreign entity involved. Like if China was involved, then yes, they will do that. But between sort of U.S. companies or non-adversarial countries, I don't think they're going to do that. But don't you see that that's the way that those press releases are worded? It's such that they could dump all the engineers tomorrow that are involved in that and continue on and say we're not involved, and continue on and try to convince a judge that it's not even worth listening to Wisk's case. That's what I read into it, because it's so finely worded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just scanning through the actual brief itself, all their different points. Wisk's speculation about new timelines is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Wisk has not established imminent irreparable harm.
Right.
I'm not a lawyer, so just glancing through, man, what a job these judges and lawyers have. Some technical. That's why they get paid what they get paid. But yeah, it's like you said, it seems more complicated than it might seem with just a simple press release or a. It just like seems like there's a lot of stuff that maybe is unknowable or just really tough to flesh out.
Do you feel like there's a sacrificial lamb in the middle of this that's going to get dumped at some point? And it's a question of when. Like Archer, if somebody did take information, right? So if there is some engineer that did happen to take information from Wisk and ends up at Archer, what does Archer not want to do straight out? Because it feels like an admission of guilt is to fire the engineer. Maybe that would have been the right thing to do early on, and said, "Oh yeah, totally, this person needs to go." Gone, and de-escalate it. But once you don't do that, then you gotta hang on to that person until a judge basically tells you to dump them. And I feel like that's going to be the happy medium. Like, okay, these engineers have to go, but at that point, it's kind of too late. I think that's what Wisk is feeling. It's too late.
So, last thing, Alan, that I want to get your take on is this iFly single seat eVTOL. And so the market that they're looking to go after here is, and this is cool, it's like white again, like Apple could make this like this. It's a shiny, interesting iPod of the sky. But it's so they don't want to have this certified to fly commercially. They would just want to have it as like a powered ultralight. So no registration,
right.
No pilot's license.
Right.
And then it would have to weigh less than 115 kilograms, which is 254 American pounds, and max out at 64 miles per hour, which would be plenty to just get you wherever you want to go and look like that weirdo landing at the farmer's market with your, one person eVTOL. But this looks like basically like a chair with like a barbell attached atop and below it, with like a ducted fan at each end of, if you could imagine a barbell like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, is that a legitimate market where we're going to see a whole subsection of eVTOLs where they're in this ultralight category where you don't need a pilot's license? I mean, is that going to be a thing? That seems kind of cool, but also kind of crazy.
Well, there has been the light sport aircraft and the ultra light aircraft marketplace for a long time, right? That's how Burt Rutan really got into the aviation industry, was by making small kit airplanes. And there's always been this kit market that has existed in the United States and has been pretty vibrant. I don't think anybody's got super rich off of it, but there's been a number of small aircraft companies, and they're making really complicated designs, carbon fiber airplanes with all kinds of fancy power plants and different pieces of technology. They're way more advanced than I remember. Now, in about a week or so, so we're towards the end of July. So in about a week or so is Oshkosh, which is the Experimental Aircraft Association's big fly-in. So there'll be thousands of airplanes and 100,000 people that'll show up typically at non-COVID times. I'm not sure they're going to get that this year. But when you go walk down the aisles, and I did that back probably in the 80s or so, there's all kinds of aircraft variations and kit build this and kit build that and new technology here and this kind of idea about here. So you just get this really diverse set of interpretations of what an aircraft is and what performance means and what is a useful feature on, someone who flies up in the Northwest was mountainous, a bunch of rivers, and you go and flying to go fishing, versus what you would need in the Northeast, where there's a lot of cities and you're going from home to work sort of thing. There's just such a variety of ideas and concepts. I do think you're going to start seeing at Oshkosh some of these electric aircraft. In fact, I know that there's going to be some electric aircraft showing up at Oshkosh. So that technology and the way that let's call them creative pilots. A lot of people are not engineers, or people are very handy with tools and know how to make things. Can build an airplane and fly it. But I think that's one of the weird things about the United States that doesn't exist in a lot of other countries, is that you have a lot of amateur pilots or amateur aircraft builders in the States and in Canada a little bit that do push the envelope. And I follow, and you should follow some of this, Dan, because it's kind of cool. There's some light aircraft podcasts and YouTube channels that showing average people building their own aircraft, and all the little bits of technology that they put in the aircraft is just fascinating because that's the sort of the grassroots way of making airplanes better, different, more responsive, whatever you want. And it's like in a day when you used to build your own car, right? That on the airplane side has never really gone away, and it will. I think you will see more and more and more electric things. In fact, did you see the article? I think it came out today about the company that's going to buy a bunch of Cessna Caravans, which is the high-wing, single-engine, in the front, propeller-driven aircraft. I think they're going to buy 100 with an option to buy 50 more, and they're going to electrify them.
Textron
Yeah.
Aviation. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And there you go. Right. It's a relatively small company, so to speak, that's buying these aircraft off the production line. Going to take out the piston engine or turbine engine. I don't even remember what's in a Caravan anymore, and put batteries and an electric motor in it and go fly it. That is a big step. It doesn't seem like a huge technology step, but it is. And I think those kind of steps will get us to a more electric future. So the experimental stuff up at Oshkosh is wonderful. These companies that are modding existing aircraft and putting electric motors on it is going to move the industry forward because you're going to learn a lot from them. And that's, at least in the United States, has been the way technology happens. Elon Musk doesn't develop everything. A lot of it's sort of developed by people in their garages, and then it just gets picked up by someone like Musk who has cash to bring it to reality. Do you see that much? I mean, you haven't been around that kind of small homebrew aircraft market, but do you kind of see how that? So it's like people building the computers, like Steve Jobs and Wozniak building a computer, saying, "We want a computer. Let's just go build it."
Off-the-shelf parts and putting it together. Yeah, Surf Air was the company that has bought those from Textron, which is the maker of the Cessna.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Like, why try to do all of it? Like, if you just got one piece, like, and that's what Steve Wozniak, I heard him talking recently about the right to repair, which is a movement that I'm happy is taking off, because this is ridiculous that you buy a thing and you don't own it, essentially. Like, you don't have the right to repair it. But he was talking about, he's like, the Apple computer would have never happened had we not been able to buy things off the shelf, disassemble them, and make them into something new without, getting sued or whatever it was. Like, this used to be a fundamental right. And it's crazy to think that farmers now can't repair their own tractors, and that, you could buy a plane and not be able to repair your own plane, because if you do, it violates the licensing agreement, and now the warranty's void, and now you can't get that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But you're right. The fact that people can buy a Cessna like this, mod it how they want it, resell it, like that's a great thing, because now you have two companies sort of working together, to accomplish, a unique goal.
Yeah. I do think you're going to see a lot more of that in the next 5 years. You will.
Well, that's it for today's episode of the Struck Aerospace Engineering Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen, and check out the show notes from today's podcast for more information on WeatherGuard Lightning Tech, Strike Tape Lightning Diverters, and all the helpful links from today's show. We'll see you here next time on the Struck Podcast. Strike Tape, WeatherGuard Lightning Tech's proprietary lightning protection for radomes, provides unmatched durability for years to come. If you need help with your radome lightning protection, reach out to us at weatherguardaero.com. That's weatherguardaero.com.